Welcome, what's up you guys? I am in a bit of a limbo stage right now. As you can probably tell, I will be moving in just a few days. By the time I post this, I will have already moved. It is 85 degrees in here, and so we'll do what we can. Today we're talking about how to be a better conversationalist and a good listener, because the two definitely go hand in hand. You need to be a good listener to be a good conversationalist. And I think these are not tips that are commonly taught, even though they should be. So I have today 8 tips for how to be a better listener. And then I also have another skit. You guys really liked the skit I did a few weeks ago. I got a lot of valuable feedback, and so I want to give more skits and examples for you to really implement this and visualize it in your head in terms of how to put it into practice. So let's get started. Tip number 1 to be a better listener and conversationalist is you have to stop thinking about yourself as you're talking. So many of us go into conversations self-conscious, wondering about how we're coming off. Are we seeming like we're actively listening? Do we have something insightful to respond? What if instead of being self-conscious, we could be other-conscious? We could focus on how the other person is feeling, or at the very least, the content of what they're saying. Every time you catch yourself thinking about how you're coming off, pause and redirect to the other person and ask yourself, how could I paraphrase mentally what the person in front of me is trying to say? Literally, like imagine that you're about to get quizzed on what they're saying in the next minute when they stop talking, and you have to summarize what they said. So that's the first thing you gotta do. You gotta shift from self-focused to other-focused, try to truly grasp what the other person's saying to you. Tip number 2, mirror their emotional tone. We have basically mirror neurons in our minds, which facilitate empathy. And so we naturally do a little bit of this where whatever emotional content the other person is giving us, we respond with something similar. So if they're saying something sad, we might look sad also. If they're saying something happy, we might look happy also. Through facial body language, through facial expressions. And also just through mannerisms. Like you wouldn't giggle when somebody is sad, for instance. Or, sometimes you would, there are awkward situations where someone comes to you and says oh my God, this terrible thing happened to me. And sometimes you feel an urge to giggle because you're nervous. Don't beat yourself up if that happens. Lots of strange things happen when you're nervous. The key is to, again, focus on the other person and ask yourself, what are they feeling? How can I express the same emotion as them? Now, while we're on the topic of being a good conversationalist, some of you might struggle with being a good conversationalist because you don't speak the same native language as the other person. And if that is the case, mastering the language is really important to be able to actually have good conversation. It's kind of doubly hard because you're already trying to focus on what to say, and then you also have to think about how to say it. So that's where the sponsor of today's video comes in, Babbel. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world. When I use it, I can really tell that it's created with memory retention in mind. I can tell based on the structure of the exercises that it's meant to help you not just speak better and listen better and comprehend better, but also to even write better because it gives you little chunks of a word, almost like a little bit of a prompt, but then still challenges you to write out the word. I recently moved, as you might tell by my background right now, so I use Babbel for a couple of languages. I'm not going to share where I moved. For all intents and purposes, I'm going to share that I've been learning Italian, but I'm not living in Italy. It's just a really convenient way to learn a new language. If you're in a situation like me, or if you have to learn it for business, or maybe to speak with certain family members that speak a different language, or just because you want to do something new and expand your horizons. I really appreciate that they have a quiz in the beginning to see what your pre-existing level is because not many apps have that and you kind of just have to start from the beginning for a lot of them. The lessons are created by over 650 language experts and you have a 20-day money-back guarantee if it's not for you. So worth giving it a try.
Lui.
Lei.
Lei.
Io.
Io.
Tu.
Tu.
Ciao, io sono Federica.
Piacere, io mi chiamo Andrea.
E questo bambino chi è?
Get 60% off your subscription using my link below. And while you're at it, let me know, what language would you like to learn and why? Thank you so much to Babbel. Use my link for 60% off. How to be a better listener and conversationalist. Tip 3. Acknowledge the other person's emotions. Oftentimes, the emotional tone of what a person is saying is more important than the content of what they're saying. Especially in arguments with people, you'll find that people don't want you to necessarily agree with their point of view. They just want you to understand how they're feeling and to acknowledge it. Acknowledging the other person's emotions can be literally saying wow, I can tell you're really anxious right now, or can just be validating how you might feel in their position or how you suspect they might be feeling. That is so frustrating, or that sounds so hard, or oh my god, I'm so excited for you. Because it just feels so deflating when a person comes to you and they're trying to express an emotion and you in turn cannot mirror it for them and cannot acknowledge how they feel. Tip number 4 is ask clarifying questions. Sometimes when people are telling a story, we don't know what to respond because we don't have all our questions answered. And if that's the case, just ask them. Ask what you're curious about. Let's say that your friend is going on a tangent about something that happened to someone she knows. Maybe her cousin got abducted somewhere. Your genuine curiosity might be to ask, oh my god, what happened to your cousin in the end? Is your cousin okay? In the moment, though, you might feel self-conscious and try to reel yourself in and be like, oh, I don't know if this is appropriate to ask. I don't want to trespass any boundaries. But I think you'll find that if you just lean into your curiosity, it's not as socially inappropriate as we often think it is. You can just frankly ask, do you mind if I ask what happened with your cousin? And if the other person doesn't feel comfortable, then they can say, no, I don't want to talk about it, and it's fine. Or if somebody's going through a really hard time, sometimes people don't know what to say. A really simple thing to ask is, how are you holding up? What do you need? How can I help? Instead of trying to guess what exactly it is that would be helpful to do in the moment, just ask the person. Side note, if you like this type of content and figuring out how to interact with people, how to communicate effectively, check out the Connection course, which contains over 4 hours of lectures on topics such as this one. Tip number 5, when you find yourself kind of blanking on what to say, pivot to honesty. Again, similar to the asking certain questions, you would be surprised. The things we want to respond to people are not as inappropriate as we think they are. Oftentimes we try to get bogged down in what's the correct thing to say, what's the savvy thing to say in the situation, what's the charismatic thing to say. You will come off as more charismatic if you are instead just true to what you're really thinking. So if you're going up to ask someone out, for instance, you could try to think of a way, an excuse to get their number or something like that, and then it turns out awkward, or even you don't end up getting their number. Or you could just honestly say, I noticed how beautiful you are from across the room and I'd love to take you out on a date. Can I get your number? It's that easy. Just by being honest, you will figure out what to say. Of course, if you're not that great a person, if you have nefarious thoughts under the surface, maybe this won't work out that well. But for most people, that's not the case. Sometimes if you don't even know what to say, you can say that. You can say, oh my god, I'm so sorry to hear what happened to you. I don't even know what to say. I don't even have the words to express it. Just be honest. Tip number 6 is about tracking. Tracking what a person is saying, even as they're going down a long monologue, instead of getting fixated on one specific thing that they said. I used to do this a lot when a person was talking to me. I was always thinking about, what am I going to respond? What should I say that would come off however they want me to come off? And in doing so, I would get fixated on one negligible detail they mentioned early on in their monologue that completely missed the mark in terms of what they were trying to communicate. And then, of course, you respond to what the other person said and they feel like, wow, you really didn't understand what I was trying to say at all, do you? When somebody is talking to you and they're giving you a long soliloquy, try to prioritize recency over primacy, meaning try to prioritize the most recent thing they said rather than the first thing they said. Let's say they start off by talking about a dream of theirs, and then by the end of the conversation, they're talking about their mom. Don't go back to the dream if now they're already on to a different topic. Talk about what they're talking about currently, not 2 minutes ago. Tip number 7 is to bond over common ground. When you agree with someone or when you empathize with someone, really be enthusiastic about it. Show how emphatically the two of you share that thing. If someone's saying they really like jazz, don't just say, oh, me too. Say, oh my god, I do too. Obviously, tailor it to your own personality. Some people are just not going to be as enthusiastic and are just going to be a little bit more mellow than others. But the more you can try to infuse enthusiasm about common ground, the better it'll be received by the other person. And then tip number 9 is to always ask yourself, what will get the ball rolling back to the other side? Conversation is like a game of tennis, but it's a game of tennis that you're not there to win. You're there to bond. When another person is saying something to you, you shouldn't be trying to think about how you're going to hijack the conversation or how you're going to one-up them. You should be thinking about, how can my response facilitate their response? How can it further deepen this conversation, this back and forth, so that, like in playing tennis, you can get as many balls rolling from one side to the other. Let me give you an example of what not to do. I used to be a hostess at a restaurant, and I was talking with two of the other workers there. And one of them was asking me questions about my life, and I was answering him. And then the other hostess at one point said something like, I don't even remember what it was, but she somehow tried to get the conversation to her. And the other coworker literally looked her dead in the eye. He saw straight through her in that moment. And he said, why are you always trying to one-up people? Like, definitely don't do that. Now, that's not to say you can't share about your own experiences or empathize and bond in that way. Of course you can. And sometimes that can deepen the connection if the other person understands that you have common ground. But be very careful when someone is telling you about their life. Don't hijack the conversation and talk about yourself. And always be thinking about, how can my response facilitate their response? How can I play tennis like a colleague rather than like an opponent? All right, so here we're starting off with an example of what not to do.
Hey, is this spot on the floor taken? Hey, is this seat taken?
No, please.
Great dinner party, huh?
It really is. Here I really answered with the minimum necessary. I didn't really pass the ball back to him. I could have asked an honest, curious question here instead, but I really just stopped at answering his question.
So, how do you know Jessica and Matthew?
I went to school with Jessica. Here we have more of me basically just answering the bare minimum, not expressing any sort of curiosity about the other person or passing the ball.
Oh, cool. I actually went to school with Matthew, and I've known Jessica for a few years since they got together.
Oh, nice. Jessica was wild back in the day. Again, we have an example of me switching the topic back to myself and also going back to an older topic, which was going to school with Jessica, instead of a more recent topic, which is this guy going to school with Matthew. It feels kind of awkward and out of place. You can kind of tell that I'm nervous and just trying to think of something interesting to say, and you can tell that I'm switching up the content emotionally from something light to something more gossipy and mean.
Is that so? I wouldn't have guessed.
Oh yeah, Atlanta needed to look out for her. Here again, I'm still keeping the conversation on myself. It's still a little bit inappropriate for the initial context of the conversation.
Oh, you guys went to school in Atlanta? My grandma actually lives in Atlanta, but I don't visit her much because she's, let's just say, very old-fashioned in her views.
Yeah, I didn't love living in Atlanta, to tell you the truth. Just here, I bounced the ball back to myself again, and I'm not going based off of recency, the most recent thing that the other person mentioned. I'm gonna go grab a drink. Here, I'm not maintaining rapport as I'm leaving the place. There's a good chance that this person might feel like, wow, this conversation was kind of flaccid, and now this person is leaving. I definitely don't want to talk to them again. Now, here we have an example of a good skit.
Hey, is this seat taken?
No, please.
Great dinner party, huh?
I know, right? Jessica and Matthew did such an amazing job setting everything up. Now here we have an example of a better conversation. Here I was mirroring the other person's emotional content with excitement.
Yeah, their house is amazing.
It really is. How do you know them? Here I pivoted to honesty and curiosity instead of feeling awkward or self-conscious.
I went to school with Matthew, and I've known Jessica for a few years since they got together.
Oh, nice. It's funny. That's actually my relationship with Jessica, except inverse. I went to school with Jessica, and then I've known Matthew since they got together. Here I was bonding over common ground, and I was also mirroring the emotional content more.
Oh, cool. Where'd you guys go to school?
Emory University. Do you know it? Now here I asked Emory University, do you know it? Because I wasn't sure whether the other person knows what I'm talking about. So I'm just being honest and asking a question to clarify.
No, where's that?
It's in Atlanta.
Oh, awesome. My grandma actually lives in Atlanta, but I don't go to visit her much because she's, let's just say, very old-fashioned in her views.
Is that so? Yikes, I think I know what you mean. That's no fun for you. Again, more mirroring emotional content, switching to more of an amused emotion, acknowledging emotional content by saying that's no fun for you, acknowledging common ground by saying we both have experience with Atlanta. I could have chosen to go back and focus on Atlanta as the subject, but he mentioned his grandma more recently, so I focused on the grandma instead.
Yeah, it's not ideal.
Well, I want to hear more about this. I'm just going to go grab some punch and I'll be right back. Can you save me my seat, please?
Yeah, sure.
Great. Now, here I was emphasizing interest even while detaching from the conversation. I was trying to keep up the charisma. And I was just being honest instead of trying to think of the right thing to say. I did honestly want to continue this conversation, but I also wanted to grab some punch and I also wanted to make sure my seat wasn't taken. This accomplished all of those. That wasn't so bad, was it? You'll notice there are some differences between the two skits. In skit 1, the other person carried most of the conversation, just enough to demonstrate my poor listening skills, but not everyone's going to do that in reality. In reality, if you're not carrying your half of the conversation, there's a good chance the other person might not either. Whereas in the second skit, I got to know more about the other person, to bond over shared ground. It was more conducive to connection and intimacy. Don't forget to get 60% off your subscription with Babbel using my link below.